All right. Thanks for working out with us, guys. Appreciate you guys being here. Once again, Breakfast Club is my opportunity at building some community, bringing together some like-minded people, reminding us of the strength that it takes to sometimes go on our healing journey, and then give you guys some resources along the way. My name is Brittany Terry. I'm a health and nutrition coach, so I help people build routines and systems that help them achieve their health goals for the long term. Our spotlight for the month is Donnie, so I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Donnie Martinez. I'm a psychedelic natural medicine advocate. So back in 2022, we as a group in Colorado, all the citizens, voted to decriminalize a class of natural medicines throughout the state. And at that time, we'd been working in the background with a couple of different types of medicine, came up with some proprietary techniques. So the day after everybody voted it in, even though it wasn't technically legal still for like another 6 months, we kicked the doors open, invited a bunch of veterans in. We're giving them out free psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and then we started openly dosing people with DMT. So what DMT is, it's an endogenous chemical within you. So every plant and animal on the planet has DMT within it in order to create life, if you will. So you've got it in you. It's in your pineal gland, stores in your lungs. You release it when you work out like we just did. So when you get to huffing and puffing, you do a release of DMT. That's part of the reason you feel so good, because it then bum rushes your system with a bunch of good hormones and chemicals throughout your brain and your body. So what we figured out is that if you take this chemical, extract it from plant matter, and supplement people with it, that it gets their natural system working a little better again. So it's as if we've clogged our hose. We all have this system where it should be free flowing, but then we've calcified our pineal gland. You've heard from using fluoride and things like that. And then the microplastics in our environment also kind of stuffed up our system. So we give people just enough to free up their own system. So then after a few doses, their system starts flowing again, and their nervous system will go back to the way it should operate. Because we've done a lot of things in our environment, both physically and psychologically, to damage our systems. So we use this as a way to kind of throttle the natural system, get everything going again, and then it helps people regulate back to their normal state where we all should have been in the first place.
Cool. Okay. So you kind of branched into this psychedelic realm. I feel like, and if I'm speaking for you, correct me, but did some of that come from that mental health side of things, like wanting to help people with these mental health struggles, specifically veterans dealing with PTSD, that kind of thing? Like, is that where it stemmed from, is kind of that mental health angle?
Yeah, our big push was always veterans and then people in the recovery world. My partner, Ken Reef, he's a veteran himself, and he started a couple of veterans groups. And then I come from the recovery side. I went through a whole addiction recovery process down to rehab, detox, sober living facility. So then they put me on some psych medicines. And after a while, I didn't like how I felt numbed on psych medicines. So we started studying this other alternative, that there were all these natural medicines already put in place by God in our environment. So I use these to get myself off of the psych meds. So SSRIs, SNRIs, beta blockers, there's this whole class of things that we've been abusing, if you will, in the medical industry, over prescribing to people to numb systems when really what they need is to actually plug in and feel more. So we made the conscious decision to go from numb, using alcohol, street drugs, pharmaceuticals, to what's the most we can feel? Can we fully connect to this thing and fully enjoy it? And that was the big thing, is when we made that decision, we figured out how beautiful this whole thing could be. And once you figure that out, you want to share it with everybody. So we went around just finding as many people as we could. And we treated over 1,000 people in our Canyon City clinic in the last year and a half. Openly, we have a spot on Main Street, downtown Prisonville, USA, Kentucky, and we openly dosed over 1,000 people there. And we're able to get outcomes that we never even predicted on things like autoimmune diseases. We shifted people's lupus, MS. I've seen people with lame arms get function in their arm back. I've seen people who were in a wheelchair who couldn't walk get functionality in their legs back. It mostly works by giving workarounds to the nervous system. So a lot of these injuries we have are projections of the psyche into the body. And if nobody's ever read The Body Keeps the Score, it's a brilliant book. It empirically breaks down the reason why psychedelics work. It doesn't bring up psychedelics necessarily very deep in particular, but it talks about how we need these workarounds because these injuries we have, many of them are a psychological plant that we've put in our body. That's why people have like a knee injury from high school. And they're like, man, this thing's bugged me since senior year in high school. Well, that thing structurally been fine for 30 years, but they planted regret, shame, and all the other things into that injury. So by giving psychedelics, what it does is it gives a psychological workaround to the shame and the regret and the things that have been planted in there. And then it frees it up. Because we all have what's called a default mode network. And that's the thing in our nervous system that creates behavioral and thought patterns. So if we did something one time when we were, say, 8 years old, and the brain thought that that gave us success, it cements it into your system. And we do that for the next 50 years. And we go, this brought me safety at one point, so I'm going to keep doing this behavior, and I'm going to keep doing this thought pattern. And then when given a small amount of psychedelics, it dissolves those really rigid patterns that we've created. And suddenly the brain goes, man, I could have done that and that and that. All these options were available to me, but my mind refused to see them because I was stuck in this safety mode, thinking this one path was the only way. So that's a lot of the reason why these things work, is they dissolve that default mode network and give your entire nervous system this workaround to start choosing new better paths, more advantageous paths than what we've been using.
I love that. When I think a big portion of it is that you guys allow the opening of the opportunity to then do some more of the work, right? Like I remember when I sat down with you the first time, a big portion of it is like those ruminating thoughts too, right? And how you can help break out of that just like ruminating thought pattern and give your brain, again, just that alternative lens. But it doesn't stop there, right? Like there is more to just, you can't just take a psychedelic and then everything is magically better, right? And so talk to us a little bit about what that process looks like and how you guys kind of help people along with, okay, so here's the psychedelic, this is gonna alter your reality in some way, then what do we do from there?
So we always say you can't just do the medicine, you've got to do the work. And what that means is psychedelics give you neuroplasticity, right, which is a cool catchphrase that we use. What that means is it does break down that default mode network, and it gives your brain the option to take on new patterns or to slough off old patterns that weren't working for you. But if you go back into the same life patterns, it's going to pick up or maybe even solidify some of those patterns you didn't want. So if you take a psychedelic and then go drink alcohol, for example, all it does is solidify that same reward system. But you guys are already doing one of the greatest things, right? You can take a psychedelic, and then the next day you show up, you work out, and that becomes so solidified as your reward system that the brain goes, that's what we need to be doing every day. So if you've got something that you want to take on, say you're new to working out, you'll probably all have friends you've been trying to drag in here. First time they come, they do some psychedelics that week and the brain goes, oh yeah, why haven't we been doing this all along? Because now I feel the way I should. So we do a lot of things to encourage these new behaviors. So one of the big things I do is get people to journal, get people to meditate, get them to break their patterns. So in real subtle ways, we try and get you to just interrupt your patterns. Down to, if you normally put your right shoe on first, we're gonna have you switch it up, put your left one on first, right? People do those little patterns with shoes, socks, the way you put on your shirt, the way you put on your belt, the way you walk around your house. There's a reason why your carpet's worn in just a couple places, right? We do those same things over and over and over, expecting different results. And that's kind of what rumination is, right? We get stuck on these patterns, call it the hamster wheel, and we get stuck on a pattern, And the problem is, the pattern is usually about something in the future that doesn't even exist. And so many times we're creating something in the future that doesn't exist and we're never going to meet up with it. And then what the mind does is say, oh, what if that goes wrong? Now I have to create solutions for this fantastical thing in the future that doesn't exist, may never exist. And then we start ruminating on that, try and figuring out how we can fix that. And then the human mind also does the opposite. So it'll take situations in the past, go, man, I really messed that up. Kind of made a fool of myself. Or maybe somebody did something to you. And you think, if I would have reacted different, or if I'd have said something different. So the mind retreats back to that scenario over and over and over, and then tries to create solutions for a situation that's so far gone we can't revisit it. And we found that the human mind spends a good portion of its time in those two places. So what the medicine does is it helps turn those places off or quiet those places and sets people present, because we should be functioning in the present. And a great example of that is 30 minutes ago, when you were in the middle of your workout, you probably weren't thinking of some BS a week from now. You were locked in, doing your thing. So it gives you the ability to recreate that reference point in everything you do in your life. So then you're not sitting in the office or out on the construction site doing your job, ruminating over some dumb stuff. You're locked in, you start enjoying what you're doing. Your everyday activities become a different type of joyful thing because they're not being distracted by these fantastical things in the future, these fantastical things in the past. It quiets those, quiets the hamster wheel, and just lets us be. Because that's how we should just be being instead of having to go through this thing all the time.
Yeah, I love that one. I feel like from my perspective, working with clients, one of the hardest things is breaking those patterns, right? Is getting to a place where it's like, you know, I really want to start working out more. I really want to eat more protein or whatever it is, but we're so stuck in those systems, in those habits that we're used to, that I like to think I'm a pretty good coach and can help you work through those things, and we can try different approaches and that kind of thing. But there's a giant component of like, if your brain is just stuck in that place and can't get you out, and you're just reliving that same thing over and over again, then it's really hard to make those changes that you want to make too. And so in talking with you, that's how I see it as a benefit, is just shaking that pattern up and just getting yourself a different message going in your brain of like, there is other alternatives. There is a different way of doing this instead of just the way that I've been doing it all along. And it allows you to kind of open up your mind to then like, okay, well, how do I want to do that? What does that look like? How can I make that happen? And it allows you, I think, being your own best friend in a certain way and having that relationship with yourself is really hard when you're not happy with the way that you're living your life, or you're not as active as you want to be or whatever, and that you can be really hard on yourself and that kind of thing. And so just opening up that pathway of there are other ways of doing things, and I'm able to do that myself, and kind of like instilling that ownership back into things of like, these are things that you can do. You know, you can do the psychedelics, you can do your journaling, you can have that like positive self-talk with yourself. And that's ways that you actually start moving the needle instead of just running in this loop over and over again. So that's why I feel like there's a degree of, I'm excited to see research being done on these different alternatives, because it's like, you know, there's a degree where so many people are just like stuck in that loop. And so it's like, it feels like that is a hole that we have in our current mental health picture, in our current medical system, is like, okay, but what if we are stuck? And what if the antidepressants aren't working? And so like, it feels like there's not a lot of other options. And so it feels like what you guys are doing is another option. But I imagine with that comes a lot of presumptions about the medications and about the substances that you guys are using. So I'd love for you to just take an opportunity to talk about some of the misconceptions or misunderstandings about psychedelics specifically, or especially the way that you guys are using them, because you're not just sending people to the moon.
Yeah,
right?
That's important, right? So the word psychedelic itself conjures up some images in everybody's mind, right? So I had a lady yesterday, went to dose her, and she said, now am I going to see like pink elephants and blue dragons or anything like that? And I said, no, it's not like that at all, actually. That's a possibility when we overdose on these medicines. And we got used to hearing those stories because people were making bathtub LSD in the 70s and 60s. And that's when the first movement was on all of this. And it was all about high use. And then Joe Rogan and all his guys, 15 years ago, even on the podcast, were talking about, oh, you should do DMT. You just keep hitting this until you like slump over. And then you go see space aliens and machine elves and stuff like that. And they were on the cusp of something, but they were too early with it. So they were abusing it really bad. So what we decided is, since we were recovery people, was our theory with everything was always, what's the smallest amount of something I can use and get the same amount of benefits? So we found that space aliens and the elves are up here, right? And that the benefits for DMT are down here. So what we do is we give people just enough to reset their nervous system, and sometimes they get what you would call sacred geometry. So if you close your eyes and you kind of poke around on your eyelids, you get that flash and coloration, right? It's similar to that. It's just a little bit of change in your field of vision when your eyes are closed. But mostly what we have is a state of meditation. And most people don't know how to meditate. So it ends up being a meditation hack. Without all these colors and dragons and everything that everybody thinks it is 6 minutes of close your eyes, sit back, and just relax and meditate. And you might get a little something in the background of your vision field, and then it gently washes you back to the shore. You open your eyes, and suddenly that hamster wheel's either slowed down or stopped. So it doesn't have anything to do with this great grand mystical experience or these wild feelings. We're actually trying to move it the other way. We're trying to take these wild feelings that you might have of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, of the everyday, everything's so whipped up I can't even stop and pause in my day is most people's thing, right? I don't even have time to meditate, right? I don't have 10 minutes it takes to do that. So what it does is it coaxes you into that meditative state for 6 minutes, just long enough to pause and catch your breath and slow your whole system down.
Love that. And I feel like just giving you that opportunity, right? That quiet that your brain doesn't get very often. Like our world is bombarding us with stuff left and right all the time. And so just having a moment of like meditation is really important also, and just having that quietness. And so even almost a forced meditation session of like, then even giving people a glimpse of what meditation can do for you, and how just taking that time and squeezing in 5 minutes in your day to sit and take some deep breaths, like can really make a difference for you too.
Yeah. It's almost a forced meditation, in fact, because it's just so effective. People will come in and they've got all these floating thoughts and they're speaking about it and they're a little disjointed, if you will, or dysregulated. And then we give them a dose of the DMT and they come out of it and we'll ask them, so what are you thinking about now? And a lot of times they'll cock their head like a dog because they can't believe it. And they're like, well, nothing. Not thinking about anything. And we say, well, then think forward a week. All that stuff you were just worried about when you came in here, can you worry about that? And they say things like, well, I can think about it, and I know I have to do that 4 days from now, but I can't seem to create the worry in my system right now. Because we really shouldn't be worrying about those things, because again, we're creating a fantastical scenario that it probably won't look like that when we get there, and then creating a worry and ways to fix that. When really we just have to prepare for it and then meet it when it comes. And it's really neat how we can turn that off and just turn the worry part of it off without the actual responsibility part of it being turned off. Like drinking, we can drink till we're like, man, I ain't even thinking about that, right? You can even smoke weed enough to where like, you just don't care. But there's not the same apathy that comes through with psychedelics. There's still a recognition of things need to be done. You're just not worrying about it in some weird, fantastical way like we usually do.
Well, as a nutritionist, I have to bring it back to food somehow. So how would you say your environment, your sleep, your stress, the foods that you're eating, how do those benefit or affect the results of this medication, or even just maybe make it even better if you are mindful of those things as well?
Nutrition's so big, right? Like
I didn't even tell him to say that.
I had to wean myself off Simply Lemonade like a month and a half ago because I was just chucking the stuff all winter long, and I put on like 20 pounds, and I'm like, what's the factor here? What are you messing up? I'm like, damn, there's a lot of sugar in this lemonade. So I saw the difference in myself. Now, you can have almost anything in your system when we treat somebody with DMT, right? You don't have to specialize your diet or fast beforehand or anything, but your outcomes afterwards are greatly affected by that. And I'd say sugar is probably the number one thing, right? So we treat dementia patients. I've reversed, and I'm willing to say this because I've had this talk with doctors, neuroscientists even. We work with a lot of really high-level people down to the head of family medicine at UC Health, for all of UC Health. So we've reversed a few people's dementia.
Wow.
We reversed my own dad's dementia because he was in a catatonic, dementiated state. And now he went from not talking to fully functioning and participating in family gatherings again. Oh. So we've probably a dozen people now we've worked on with dementia, and the thing I see that affects them the most is sugar intake. The ones we can get to stop having this massive amount of sugar intake, neurologically, they take to the medicine and they take to the new behaviors and new thought ways totally differently. The people who keep snarfing down sugar, we really have trouble moving the needle with them. So much of what's going on in our brain is the fuel that we select that allows those pathways to fire properly or not.
Yeah, I like to say that our body kind of makes this chemical soup, right? Like everything, we're very fluid humans, and there's a lot of nutrients and neurochemicals or neurotransmitters and all these different things just floating around in your system all the time. And our food choices and the way that we're fueling ourselves have a really strong impact on what that chemical soup is made of. And are we filling ourselves with things that are helping rebuild those neural pathways? Are we eating proteins to help strengthen those axons? Are we getting our electrolytes to help make our neurons fire more efficiently? And that you can really have an impact on what your body is doing by changing the nutrients that you're putting in it also. And then I feel like then the psychedelic side of thing and having the mental health conversation kind of comes at it from the other side of your brain is also releasing neurotransmitters into that chemical soup. And so then by doing a psychedelic situation, you're altering what those neurotransmitters are doing, you're altering what your brain is doing. And so why not support that by also getting nutrients to help support that chemical soup and make the whole thing kind of work more efficiently? That is like the nutrition compounds are the raw materials of what is making the neuroplasticity and making that more efficient and able to rebuild those new pathways. That is like, if you don't have the raw materials to do that, it becomes a lot harder to put in that work and to do those different structures and habits and the journaling and that kind of thing, is because you don't have the fuel to even do it. And so I think that I will always relate nutrition to everything because I think nutrition is so important. But when it comes to mental health specifically, is like there's very documented evidence of like not getting specific nutrients in your diet, like vitamin D's and healthy fats and sufficient protein, can have a really big impact on your mental health. And so that's where I think pairing together different tools and just widening your toolbox of like nailing your nutrition in certain areas and having things that you're working on there, and also giving yourself tools for your mental health to kind of come at it from both sides. And then you're kind of taking care of your full package instead of, I find people even in our medical system will lean on an antidepressant and not do anything else, right? That it's like having those conversations where, yes, like the fuel does matter, and the sleep that you're getting, it matters, and the time that you're setting aside to do your journaling, like it makes it more of a comprehensive picture instead of just acting like, hey, the DMT, even if you do this DMT, like everything's going to be solved for you, right? That I think you guys do a better job of incorporating the whole person and incorporating the whole conversation, right? Which I think is really important.
And that's where that pattern disruption becomes so important too, because we've been eating the same foods, eating the same way, doing the same patterns. And then when we start working out, suddenly we're like, hey, maybe I should get more protein. Maybe I should eat more whole foods. But it's easy to slip back and just smash a whole thing of ice cream, right? If that's been our pattern. So we need these pattern disruption pieces so we can take on these new patterns.
I love it. Yep, absolutely. Well, if anybody's feeling stuck right now, what's a place that you think that they could start to actually make a difference?
I would say power of the pause. Because we're all blowing through this thing way too fast. And I'll tell people to set an alarm twice a day on their phone. And if you can just pause for 45 seconds to a minute and just chill out and just take a couple of deep breaths and just slow your whole world down for a minute, it makes the biggest difference in life. So just the ability to pause, because we think, oh, I would have worked out, but I didn't have time, right? You hear that so often. Or I would have done this, whatever the new behavior is, but I just didn't have time. Man, we find time for a lot of bullshit in our lives, right? I bet we could all bust out our phone now and just be appalled at our screen time, right? Or there's plenty of other things you do throughout your day too, where we're like, oh, I always make time for X, Y, and Z, and I could easily eliminate that shit and then take on these new patterns of pausing long enough to breathe, or I do a quick 5-minute meditation, journal, which is one of the hardest things to get anybody to do, but we're talking 2 or 3 sentences. And this was the big one for me in coming out of addiction, is when I learned to pause at the end of the day and just write 3 sentences to be grateful for. I could go from thinking I had a really shitty day just because I was ending the day on an off mood maybe. And then I'd write down 3 things. It can be 3 words that were like, oh, those were actually a pretty cool thing that happened today. It takes a minute. It takes a whole minute. Just write 3 things. And then your mind goes, oh, there was happiness attached to that. There was gratitude attached to that. There's great feelings attached to each of those things. So I could have went to bed feeling shitty, or I could go to bed thinking about the wondrous things that happened throughout my day. Because I don't care how bad your day is. Even if somebody passes in your life to that level, you can go, yeah, but I got to see my cousin today. My cousin, who I hadn't seen in 5 years, finally showed up because grandma passed away. And there's gratitude within that, and there's a good feeling with that. So instead of going to bed feeling about, oh man, grandma passed away, it's the worst day of my life, suddenly it's like, oh, I have this opportunity to reignite some of these relationships in my life. And if we would just pause long enough to boom, 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 what happened today that was cool? It's going to change your whole day. So many days where I thought I had a shit day and I look back and I went, that was a great day. There was a lot of cool stuff that happened.
Yeah, I heard a quote recently that positivity breeds resiliency. And I feel like that's such a great way of thinking of like, yeah, it might not be like you might be in a hard season right now, but there's still beauty in that. And there's still good things to look for in that. And that it's there, it doesn't make the crappy stuff go away, but it makes your ability to get through the crappy stuff easier, right?
Yeah. And that's a great feature of psychedelics, is it helps us build that resiliency through these practices, right? By doing the work, because what we're trying to do in the end is build that psychological resiliency. So when life does smack you, because it's going to inevitably come back around and smack you a few times, you want to know you've built up that resiliency. Kind of like when it goes time to, chase your dog down the street because they got out, or do something that could be life-changing because you're in the middle of a chaotic situation. Have you worked out enough that you can run 200 yards and get yourself out of that situation, or save your dog or save a person? Same type of resiliency, right? We're just building it psychologically instead of physically in this case.
Love that. Well, that's all I had as far as questions. Open it up if anybody else has any questions for Donnie about DMT or mental health stuff at all.
Have you ever treated, to your knowledge, anyone with OCD? Because when you were talking about helping with dementia and the neural networks, to your knowledge, do you know if you've ever had any successful treatments of that?
Yeah, we've had some great success with OCD. OCD and autism both lend themselves. DMT is super effective on them, but then we use mescaline typically for those. So we work with magic mushroom, psilocybin, and DMT, and then mescaline as well at a really, really low level. So yeah, autism and OCD are patterns. People get stuck in these patterns. So it's the most rigid default network that you can imagine. So it dissolves part of that network, and it gives the ability for that person to release themselves from those OCD cycles that they have.
Yeah. People typically have to stay on a psychedelic for long periods, or is it like they take it for a little bit, you see some positive effects, they're able to keep going by themselves?
On the OCD and the autism, we see pretty good backslide, I'd say. So there's people who take it every 3 days just to keep themselves out of that water. And then we see durability in it. So we see overall improvements over time, but it seems that typically there's a pretty good persistence to that. So there's not a point to where they're like, oh, I'm totally cured, but it gives them relief of that main symptom that's really bugging them, if you will.
Is that the same for other thought patterns too? Like not an OCD or an autism situation, but do you find most people end up taking DMT for an extended period of time, or is it usually a shorter?
We'll usually try and double the time out. So we'll tell people, try and get about 4 doses in within the first month or 2. Try and get there every week or 2, and then we'll start doubling out 2 months from now, 4 months from now. I only take DMT every 6 months, and it's kept me off my bipolar meds, my psych meds. I feel better than I ever have. So you do see this durability where you don't fully go back to baseline on most things. And it's, I'd say, perseverating thoughts and suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation is one of the biggest things that we don't see people go back to baseline. And that's what we've seen working with veterans. We get a lot of homicidal, suicidal veterans, and those are the ones we'll blast them pretty hard with DMT without sending them to see the space aliens still. But we'll hit them pretty hard, and then typically they don't see the same amount of systems come back. It drags them to this place where they're just kind of good with where they're at, and they don't have the same I wish I wasn't here, or I want to go kill my therapist kind of thoughts. So yeah, we get that.
Would you say you kind of touched on it, bipolar, and what about like schizophrenia? Is this addictive?
I'm glad you asked about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is one of the ultimate X factors in all this, right? And the saving grace there is nobody knows how to treat schizophrenia, right? We use risperidol, right? In state hospital and stuff like that. We actually work with some of the people at the state hospital. They don't very successfully, very often treat schizophrenia, and we have mixed results with schizophrenia too. We've been able to treat a handful of people really successfully that have schizophrenia, and then another handful that they see almost 100% backslide into where they were at before. And we haven't been able to figure out what that X factor component in that is, why some people really take to the medicine and some of the schizophrenic people just don't.
Interesting. Didn't you have another question in there too?
Would you consider it to be addictive?
It's one of the only things that we can call anti-addictive. So most things are either addictive or non-addictive, right? But DMT, and I think it's partially because it's endogenous, DMT sits in a class of its own that some of the other psychedelics kind of flirt with to be anti-addictive. So I have so much DMT, I could do it 10 times a day for the rest of my life and never run out, right? I work with chemists. And every time I've done it, my thought was, I feel so good, I could do this every day. And then the next day comes and I've never wanted to do it the next day. And then the second and third day come and there's no way I'd do it, because that's when your neuroplastic peak is. It peaks out after the second and third day. And you get this state of sobriety and this state of calm that is unlike anything you've ever had, where there's no noise going on. And I wouldn't even think about doing DMT during those days. And one of the greatest examples is we were running a psychedelic sober living house. I ran a sober living house for people straight out of jail, prison, and mental health facilities. And we would offer every week at our men's group free DMT to these guys. So we had about 8 in the house at any given time, and then we'd have about another 8 to 10 people who would come from the outside and drop into this mixed men's group that we do, and it was a recovery group. Every week at this group, we would offer free DMT to whoever wanted it at the group, because we're trying to move the needle as much as we could. 2 weeks in a row, everybody in the group said, I'm still good from last week. And then they said, I'm still good from 2 weeks ago. And even I couldn't believe that. And a couple of the other facilitators were like, can you believe that? These are people who are addicts, so they have the want to take whatever you give them. And this is the thing that's keeping them from doing their drug of choice and getting their brain right. And every single person in the room said, I'd rather not. Which is really weird to me still to this day. It just works like that. It's a self-regulating drug. If I gave it to you today, you wouldn't really want to do it tomorrow. You'd just be like, no, there's no getting better. Like you reach this state where there's not better than perfectly okay.
Well, it's because it's not like a high in the same way too, right?
It's not.
So it doesn't have that same like dopamine effects that you would chase as a drug.
And neurologically, it does a bum rush of all the neurotransmitters, including dopamine, norepinephrine, the things that we're usually like, oh, that feels great, right? We go searching for dopamine. It bum rushes the system with dopamine, so we can't figure out on a science level why it doesn't lend itself to going, ooh, I want more of that type of dopamine tomorrow. It's one of the great mysteries of the compound is that it doesn't do that.
And hopefully something that we get to do more research and stuff on too, right?
Yeah.
It's like as it's being decriminalized and that kind of thing.
And we collect data with a lot of our patients, and then we work with some people who are trying to figure out what the data says. And if you want to see some scientific studies, the NIH website is just filled with it. So National Institutes of Health has dozens of published studies on DMT and all the other psychedelics. So it's backed by quite a bit of science.
Pretty cool. Cool. All right. Anybody else?
Question. You mentioned DMT a lot, but in the beginning you also said like you guys dose mushrooms or psychobenzodiazepines, is that how you pronounce it? Is DMT what you like revert to or like why?
Yeah, I revert to DMT for most everything because it's a universally good tool and it's a really powerful tool. I don't think anything else breaks down the default mode network quite like DMT does. So what I recommend is small dose DMT at a really low dose level. And then me and a couple of the doctors we work with all say high dose psilocybin. Yeah. So, and right now it's huge. Everybody's like, oh, I microdose mushrooms. But if you really want a great effect, what the best formula is you small dose DMT and then 7 to 20 days later, you do a large dose of psilocybin, magic mushrooms. And it's almost like, say there's a bunch of books on a bookshelf and none of them make sense where they're at. We call DMT the sledgehammer. Because it's like taking a sledgehammer to the whole bookshelf. All the books go away. And then psilocybin is like putting the books in a perfect card catalog order afterwards.
Interesting.
So does the large dose of psilocybin create those images and
Yeah. Yeah. So that's user beware there, right? So if you're going to do a large dose of psilocybin, you might want to do it with a facilitator or somebody who's really experienced and know what they do. Because anything above like 2 grams of psilocybin is kind of a difficult journey. And then you can use microdose psilocybin to extend out your neuroplastic window with both DMT and the large dose magic mushrooms as well. So there is a great place for small dose or microdose magic mushrooms. It's just I prefer that big dose. But buyer beware, caveat, right? Don't do that in an uncontrolled environment or anything. Yeah. Mushrooms are a great tool, but nothing does what DMT does. And actually, mescaline, magic mushrooms, those are both DMT too. So those are different types of DMT. It's a different molecular structure of DMT. So it just carries and acts a little different in the body. The DMT we're talking about is plant-derived. It's called NN-DMT, taken from root bark, and it best mimics the DMT that's already in your system. So that's why it's so advantageous over those other ones. Kind of like how you can take outside testosterone, right? And if you take tests, right, just testosterone, your body does great with it, right? Because it mimics what's already in you. But when you go adding these other compounds, they start doing a little more side effects and everything because they're not quite testosterone. So the body's like, we love this, but we're not quite sure what to do with it all the way. It's a similar type reaction.
Would you recommend this for everyone, or is this something that's more for people like with more high anxiety, high stress, something else, or like would you even recommend it for people who have a handle on their anxiety or health?
I would recommend DMT for everybody based on this. We're all walking through this matrix that we've created around here, right? Of high energy all the time, go, go, go. We're learning about tragedies in real time. If there's a school shooting in Seattle, I know about it on my phone right now, and I'm worried about those people in real time. where we used to hear about it 2 days later after the event was over. Everything we do, it seems, keeps us at this level of dopamine and cortisol the entire time. And I don't think we were ever meant to operate like that. And because we've created this all around us, we all operate too high, and we're seeing it come out in a bunch of different maladies that we commonly share now. And I think if we get back to knowing how we were supposed to operate in this moment of calm, to be able to pause, I think it's just beneficial to everybody.
Well, anybody else? Okay, how can people find you? Anything else you want to shout out before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'm about to do I've done most of my work in Canyon City, and now I've got an office up on the north side of the Springs at Sacred Space Therapeutics. We're going to have a grand opening May 2nd. So you can find me up there. And then you can find me on Recovery Ape on Instagram. That's my main page. And then I'm Donnie Martinez on Facebook. You've got my direct contact. Feel free to give it out to anybody, because I didn't bring any publishing material. We're redoing all that right now. So yeah, real personalized thing. You can give it out to anybody. Any of you can contact me directly with any more additional questions. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks, guys.
Brett.